Dr. Ahmed Zaidi, who is coming in from Pakistan. Artificial intelligence is the buzzword of the moment. And what does this really mean for the fashion industry? Dr. Ahmed Zaidi, CEO and co-founder of Hyran Technologies, will dissect the recent new role of AI in our world and perhaps reframe the tech as a tool, not as a way of life. You are my final speaker. It's final thing for day one. Thank you for calling in from Pakistan. Please take it away.
Thanks, Janice. Thanks. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. We're having some challenges here with Wi-Fi, but it seems like it's working today.
It's great. It
great.
looks great. You're great. Yeah.
So as Janice said, my background's in AI and machine learning. I was an academic at the University of Cambridge, but actually I also have a background in textile manufacturing. So I'm third generation textile manufacturing family. And today I really want to talk about the buzzword AI, but I want to try to contextualize it in a way that actually could help make some sense. And I want to do it in a way that is slightly different to most presentations, which is I want to start off with to tell you how I'm gonna tell you about the different aspects of AI. So there's a three-part solution. So the first thing is I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to tell you how that story relates to a fashion challenge, and then I'm going to give you an example of technology solution. And hopefully through this we can understand some of the challenges of, in my opinion, why if we don't pay attention to some of the challenges that I'm talking about, our venture down AI will inevitably be more disastrous than it is promising at the moment. So I'm going to start off with an example of the horse carriage and jet engine. And many years ago, when the horse carriage was the main mode of transport and the jet engine was just about to be invented, people had this idea of, well, what if we could attach the jet engine to the horse carriage and make it go way faster? But naturally, this was not such a great idea because, on the one hand, the jet engine is really, really loud and it would, make the horses really, really scared. But on the other hand, it would also just incinerate the entire horse carriage. It was made out of wood, so it wouldn't withstand the inertia that the jet engine would create. And in a way, this is a parallel to what a professor named Seymour Papert explained to the United States Congress in 1995, which is that the way that the fashion industry, or in his case with education, but let's just change that with the fashion industry, the way that the fashion industry is looking at AI is the same way that the person who thought of the jet engine on top of the horse carriage is looking at that particular example. And if we don't really redesign the horse carriage, then we risk entirely destroying the processes and the systems we have and scaring away the horses in the process. So the lesson here is that actually the first thing is that the future of fashion isn't just AI. The future of fashion is disruption. We have to rethink the processes that we've put into place and assess whether or not they are compatible with the technology we have in place. And as it stands, that's not the case. So this goes from everything the previous speaker just talked about in terms of on-demand manufacturing. The idea of on-demand manufacturing is a really great idea. People understand that it makes sense, but the challenges are infrastructural. The challenges are process-driven. And even with technology, if the processes aren't there, then you won't be able to make use of it. In fact, you would create more destruction. So that's the first lesson. The second story I want to tell you is about the USSR. You're probably thinking, what does the USSR have to do with fashion? But back when the USSR still existed, they had something called a command economy. And in the command economy, someone centrally made all the decisions. How many nails to produce that day? How many cardboard boxes to produce that day? And this approach of a command economy over time was a huge contributor to the decline of the USSR and economically resulted in a huge disaster from a growth perspective. And that's largely because in a command economy, there's one person or a group of individuals making a decision that then affects the lives of everyone else. And in many ways, that's the way that the fashion industry has been working. You have your buyers, you have your forecasters, you have your planners who make decisions, and they are essentially the command economy. And over the years, we've seen similar things that what's happened with USSR to start happening with the fashion industry, where you're seeing a accumulation of inventory, you're seeing a decline of margins, an increase of waste, an increased tension between buyers and suppliers, and largely that's because of the way that we've been working for all of those decades. So the future of fashion is collaborative. It is about working together with each tier of the manufacturing supply chain. It's about understanding what your consumer wants, about understanding what your planners are thinking, understanding what your buyers are thinking, understanding what's available on the manufacturing floor on both tier 1, tier 2, understanding the complexities of the macroeconomics that affect tier 3, especially, for example, here in Pakistan, where you had the natural disasters that resulted in a depletion of cotton, for example. So the technological relationship here is that technology without collaboration in the fashion industry is, akin to the command economy in the USSR, and will not only accelerate the decline of the fashion industry, but it will ensure that the fashion industry has a long, difficult time diagnosing the problem in the first place. So I want to give you a more specific example. Lots of people are investing in AI-based forecast solutions. That is, again, part of the command economy. Is the forecast solution considering what's possible to be manufactured at the manufacturing site? Just because you can forecast it, can you actually make it? None of these questions are being considered because none of them are considering it from a collaborative perspective. So in order to really succeed in leveraging AI, whether it's from a design perspective, whether it's from the 3D design tool side, what's the good of a 3D design tool if you can design anything, but you don't know if you can make it? So the reality is that if you really want to embrace AI and technology, then it's really about being able to be collaborative. The next story is about LTCM. Many of you may remember it, some of you probably won't, but it was a group called Long-Term Capital Management. And it was founded by several Nobel laureates some of them who developed a very famous model called the Black-Scholes model. And they were the limelight, the Apple of the Wall Street community. They were absolutely destroying it in the markets in a good way, and everyone and anyone, whether they were competitors or not, were admiring LTCM's progress and their success over several years. And what LTCM's trick was that they identified this interesting arbitrage, which is said, well, if there's a high risk decision, we can always offset the high risk decision with a low risk decision and balance it out. So let me contextualize this in the fashion industry. Fashion and retail is a high risk business. You don't know if you're going to be able to sell those goods. But a low risk decision is to buy those goods really, really, really cheap. And as a result, the industry has always played on that arbitrage. So Nike was sort of the first one to do that, buy from Japan, sell in the United States. You arbitrage on the price. Even if you have a lot of inventory, you can discount it and get it through. But what is similar to LTCM, what happened with LTCM is that over time, they continued to see their model working, but only under certain economic conditions. And eventually they were hit with economic conditions that they didn't see, they didn't foresee, they didn't understand the markets as well as they thought they did. And they were exactly 24 hours from destroying the entire US economy. The Federal Reserve Bank had to bail them out. Not many people know this, but had they not been bailed out, all the major banks, including JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, would all be out of business. So the story here goes to a similar vein, what the fashion industry has been going through. The fashion industry has long been doing this arbitrage of buying cheap and mitigating that risk. But what's happening now is that similar to LTCM, the market's changed. Turns out that it doesn't matter if you discount it, you can't get it through. Turns out that the interest rates can increase. You can't get free capital forever. Turns out that cost of goods do increase. Labor costs do increase. You could have a port congestion. And all of these unseen consequences, the unseen costs of lowest costs, is something that lots of people are not understanding. So the future of fashion is probabilistic. It's understanding what you don't know just as much as it is understanding what you do know and being able to contextualize that at every decision point that you make. And the further you can do that within your early decision-making process, the better off you are. And what do I mean by that? So if you're a designer and you're using 3D design tools, if you can understand that design change that you've made from going from a particular type of fabric to another type of fabric, and you understand the implications on lead time, cost, and therefore what the implications are on potential revenue, potential discounts, markdowns, then you can make an informed decision on whether or not and how much you should buy. That's a probabilistic approach. And I think that without this approach, doesn't matter what technology you're using, the fate is similar to LTCM. The next story is about Leonardo da Vinci. Many of you may not know that he was actually the inventor of the helicopter. But the challenge with that is that the idea was perfect. It made sense, the physics worked, but he didn't have the infrastructure. He didn't have the surrounding needs of material science, the actual tools that he needed to actually make that idea happen. And this is similar to what we see today with on-demand manufacturing. We know that in theory, it makes complete sense. But the challenge is that we don't have the infrastructure. We don't yet have the overarching technologies, workflows, everything that the previous speaker mentioned with regards to workflow solutions going up to tier 1, 2, and 3. But the point here about Da Vinci is that you can have a great idea, but not necessarily have the infrastructure. And then often when that infrastructure and those technologies do appear, then they're often divorced with the good idea in the first place. So we're at a risk of having that situation here with AI. When you go back to the 1960s, 50s, even the 1940s, and you read some of the research in supply chain and in product creation, you'll find that a lot of the ideas that we just discussed today were discussed a lot more frequently back then, but the technology didn't exist. Now that the technology exists, we are again making the mistake of applying that technology to an outdated, antiquated framework. So the only solution here is to look at the fashion industry in a holistic way. What is it that we're ultimately trying to do? And making sure that we invest in the associated infrastructure plays that are necessary, and ensuring that we stick to the ideas that make sense. And often they're the most uncomfortable ideas because they're often associated with our job roles. They're often associated with our existing way of working. But our decision making and our approach to technology has to be holistic and cannot be locally optimized. Now, I will get to locally optimized because there are scenarios where that makes sense. But in this scenario, the lesson here is that if we are to be successful with technology and AI, the decision making has to be holistic. The last story is actually a story that is a personal story. I was on the way to survey one of the oldest sock factories in the United States called Fox River Mills. And on the way there, we stopped at the Mall of America and walked into a Carhartt store. And the owner of the factory was with me, or the CEO of the factory was with me. And he said, I wanted to show you the store because our product sits in the store and I want to show you the product. So as we were walking through the store, we had a conversation with the store manager. And we asked them, these are the 3 products that Fox River Mills make. How are they performing at your store? And he said, they're doing really well, but I'm facing a particular challenge. And we asked, well, what is that challenge? And he's like, well, my black beanies that you're making keep getting sold out. And my gray ones, they don't move at all. And I've told headquarters that, the gray ones don't sell, the black ones sell. Said, give me more of the black ones. Do not give me any more of the gray ones. But every week I get that shipment of gray orders. And I'm like, well, I told you already I don't need any more of these, but that information never gets enacted on. And I don't think that the store manager fully understood that those decisions around the gray orders had been decided months in advance. So even if he is telling them, he's not really able to change that. But that's besides the point. The point is that it goes back to what I said earlier about the command economy and about a central decision maker, and about the fact that when you have a central decision maker, they are often not aware of all the intricacies and observations necessary to make a decision. And that's why I think the future of fashion is local. It's about empowering and using technology to empower individual stores, individual store managers to really understand their consumer and cater to the needs of their consumer in a way that is never been done before. Whether it's directly being able to place an order from their store into the planning system, into the manufacturer, or if it's an on-demand case, just placing another order that goes straight into manufacturing. But I think with regards to locality, I want to extend the definition to local to the consumer as well. I also think that the future of fashion is local from the consumer perspective. And ultimately, that's really what technology enables. So one of the things you can ask, and one of the things people often wonder is, why is AI hype again? What happened over the past few years? Is it just ChatGPT? What happened with AI that made it such an exciting place to focus again? And the answer is that it's the T in ChatGPT. GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformers. And the T, the transformers, is what's really, really interesting. So without getting into too much detail, in the past, AI models were based on what's called recurrent neural networks, or LSTMs, long-term, short-term memory models. And the challenge with those is that they had very short, although ironically they're called long short-term models, they actually had really bad memory. They weren't long, they weren't short, they were just no memory. And what happened as a result of that is that they weren't really able to understand their consumer that well. And they would forget things. And that's, if you ever have heard of the Amazon problem, like if you buy a plunger for your toilet, you suddenly keep getting plungers for the next week, even though you've already bought one. And it's sort of those sorts of situations. Now with transformers, what transformers were able to do is that they were really able to understand holistically what's happening. They have this mechanism called attention that spans across a much longer time horizon to understand the weight and the relative importance of all the events that have occurred before. So in the case of the toilet plunger, they'll notice, the LLCM, the transformer model will notice, yeah, the toilet plunger is just a black swan event. It's not necessarily this person's purchasing preference, and therefore let's stop recommending this particular product. Now, going back to the example of local, with transformers, it has created a new ability for consumers, for brands, for pretty much anyone in the value chain to truly understand any product, any sub-product, whether it's a raw material or a consumer, at a much longer time horizon that better encompasses their purchasing behaviors. And I think that's why the future of fashion is local, and transformers are going to be a pivotal component of that. So I just want to summarize what I mentioned. We talked about the future of fashion is disruptive. That was the example with the horse carriage and the jet engine. The future of fashion is collaborative. That's the counterexample to the USSR command economy. And the fact that technology thrives in multi-dimension decision-making. Let me elaborate on that for a second. One of the best performing models in supply chain was not actually VMI, which often people think vendor managed inventory. It was actually CPFR, which is collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. And countless literature and articles supporting that particular way of working. But the challenge was that the ability to do that collaboration across so many SKUs, across so many tiers, was so complex that the human mind couldn't really process it. And it was incredibly frustrating. So very difficult to scale. Now, with technology, with computers, with computational power becoming very cheap, these multi-dimensional problems, which is exactly what these problems are, when you have multiple dimensions, tier 1, 2, 3, the stores, the actual headquarters. This is a multi-dimensional problem. Technology is incredibly good at that, and that's really where we have to be focused on. The next thing I mentioned was probabilistic. That was the story about LTCM. So that's about technology. And you know what? Technology can be your best friend, but it can also be your worst enemy when you don't know what you don't know. And I think the biggest prediction that I'll make is that if forecasting algorithms, AI-based forecasting algorithms continue to proliferate across our industry, I predict that there will be a huge, huge inventory issue again as a result of not knowing what they don't know. Forecasting algorithms will be noise disguised as objectivity. And I think that's a really, really important thing. So you have to be probabilistic about your decision making, especially to be able to use AI effectively. Holistic, we talked a little bit about Da Vinci's and helicopter, and how you need to be thinking broader, holistic, about having the infrastructure in place to make the products that you need to be able to make. Specifically, we talked about on demand. And finally, local. And I think that goes back to the transformers and the Carhartt store manager example. But ultimately, I think whether it's the past, the present, or the future, fashion is always, and always will be, always has been, about the customer. So whenever you're in doubt about how do I use this technology, it all has to come back to, how will this ultimately help my customer achieve the results that they want to achieve? Will it improve their experience? Will they get the right product at the right time? And I think if you use that as a North Star, then the use of technology becomes a lot more clear. Thank you. That's all I want to share.
Oh my God, you just wrapped everything. It's awesome. And, I love the fact that you ended on the fact that at the end of the day, it's all about the customer. We tend to forget a lot of that, right? When we're
Absolutely
thinking about what we do, how we do it, and we get so into the weeds that we forgot that actually we're making something for somebody.
Absolutely.
So with that, I want to ask you though, because you're working on something new.
Mm-hmm.
What actually are you doing in your new technology venture?
Well, actually, we're doing the collaborative bit of what I just explained. So we are really working on working very closely with manufacturers to build capabilities using technology for agility. We all talk about agility as being a great mechanism of reducing waste and increasing margins, but operationalizing that, as very correctly mentioned by the previous speaker, is down to the complexity of the manufacturer's inability to do that. And a lot of the work is actually offloaded to the manufacturer when it comes to being able to do that. So that's really where we are focused on.
Yeah, without any kind of visibility to the consumer, right? It's like a lot of that responsibility has been pushed down without any transparency into the demand chain, or to actually the collaborative nature of actually being able to see that demand chain, right?
Absolutely.
And that's been, that I think because we both have come from this kind of manufacturing background, we keep saying, let the factory in, let the factory in. And it's, there is much more to this power dynamic that we see that has to actually shift, because it was all instruction driven. And now actually we're saying it's only the people who are actually making the things who can understand how these things actually impact going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, sometimes we just have to look at other industries and see what they're doing, right? So whether it's semiconductor, whether it's, command economy in the USSR and their decline, or whether it's education, education has seen a transformation from being a very instructionalist approach where teachers would just tell students what to think,
Yes.
towards, the Montessorian approach, which is much more collaborative. And I think that there is a greater truth to that around how, you create synergies across multiple dimensions and multiple tiers. It's about being able to empower everyone across the value chain and create value for everyone. Now, the challenge is that's not currently the case, and that's a cultural requirement. But, hopefully the pressure from the macroeconomic aspects, as well as the, regulations coming into place, it will somewhat force the brands to start playing ball and, collaborate more with their manufacturers.
Well, I really, really hope so. And, actually the biggest thing that you've brought us at the end of today and nearing 3 a.m. my time is hope, right? As much as we feel sometimes like we're pushing this like ball up the hill and every day it rolls back on us, things are changing. But they have to. There's no choice in the matter. And the quicker that we realize that, the better. And, we are at a point in time where we have all the tools at our disposal to do all of those things. And now we actually really have to use them. I mean, we have been undisciplined for way too long. So
absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, our investors asked us, what is your technology competitiveness? And I said, look, to be honest, first of all, I don't believe that. I don't believe in technology competitiveness. Everything can, unless you're Google and you own all the data, you can really replicate anything. The difference is we're actually truly innovative on the business model side. And I think that's really where people need to be thinking. It's like technology is an enabler, but how can you incentivize every person in the value chain to work with you and incentivize them not with a stick, but with a carrot, and essentially say, look, we're going to share something with you. We're going to share value with you. if you give us agility and take a risk and pre-position materials for us, then you know what, we'll give you 5 basis points on whatever profit we make, for example, as a result of your effort. That sort of conversation, it's a win-win for everyone. But you'll be surprised how that's such a simple arithmetic can be so complicated for people who are used to working in a certain way. They're not badly intentioned or anything like that. It's just they're used to working in a certain way, and it's very, very difficult to break that mold. But that's what we're here for.
Well, they've been taught 20 years to do the same thing, right? Or actually 40 years to do the same thing, is go look for the cheaper needle, go push the price down, go do all those things, as opposed to, hey, listen, we can actually, this is the full margin that can be had. Let's all make money together. Let's all provide a good service together. And let's actually all provide a good product together, right? I cannot wait until you show us that technology part and that we actually see it in practice, because practice is where it's actually gonna, frame everything.
Absolutely.
Stay well and healthy, and this is where we end. So thank you so much, Ahmed.